Hello, today I'm making what I'm calling a balanced druid dungeon guide. I'm going to be talking both about things happening in the dungeon around me. This is Algeth'ar Academy on a plus 15 Thundering. And I'm also going to be talking about what I'm actually doing as a boomkin to try and optimize damage and just how I'm playing my rotation in general. These are the talents that I'm running before I get into the dungeon. Feel free to pause and copy them if you want. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So right at the start of the dungeon here, you see me talking to the bronze Dragonflight. There's actually 4 NPCs that give you a buff in the respective secondary stats. As a balanced druid, the only ones relevant to us are the bronze Dragonflight for 5% haste, and the blue Dragonflight for a flat mastery buff. Just because haste feels really good to play with balanced druid in beta right now, I went with the haste buff. The mastery could end up being better, it'll depend on sims. But make sure you pick up one of the buffs before you do this dungeon, it's a big value gain. So heading into this pull, there's only one really dangerous mechanic to look out for. The spellbound scepters in this pull cast something called Mystic Blast, which is a big AoE group damage and definitely something you want to prioritize kicking. Everything else just hits your tank or does small damage to your group and isn't anything crazy to watch out for. So before this pull starts, I just want to go over what my priorities are as a balanced druid. I'll go into more depth on the actual ability rotation later on. But the basic ideas are, because our mastery's been shifted all to our dots, you really want to set up both Moonfire and Sunfire in every single mob in the pull as soon as possible. Twin Moons really helps make that a lot easier. And then once you get into the pull, in AoE, your priority is pretty much to just get as many Starfalls popping as possible. Now that we can cast Starfalls stacking on top of each other, it's a large part of our AoE damage. And so you'll see me go into this pull, I'll multi-dot everything, and then I'll just start ripping Starfalls on them. In addition to just pressing as many spenders as possible, the real thing that gives Balanced Druid kind of a interesting rotation now is Rattle the Stars, which is highlighted in the red box right now. So the way Rattle the Stars works is every time you press either Star Surge or Starfall, you get 1 stack of the buff. It lasts for 5 seconds. And every time you press a spender, it refreshes the duration. You want to maintain Rattle the Stars at 2 stacks uptime at all time, because it increases the damage and reduces the cost of our spenders, just letting us press them more and deal even more damage. And so you'll see a lot of the times I'm pressing a spender and then I'm weaving 2 to 3 global cooldowns in between, and then I'm pressing the spender again to maintain Rattle the Stars uptime. That is really going to be a huge core part of Balanced Druid's rotation, assuming it doesn't get changed again. And Rattle the Stars is pretty much what we play our entire rotation around. So you see this pull that we've been in for a little bit. There's a bunch of little guys that are leaping around dealing small damage to our group, and then there's the big Arcade Ravager in the center. His whole deal is that he targets someone and they have to spread away from the group, and then he lunges at them, and then he turns around and launches a frontal. You definitely don't want to be hit by the frontal because it will kill you. The rest of the pull is fairly safe, and there's nothing specific you need to kick. So you can see as the pull continues, I'm really trying to keep my Rattle the Stars up all the time. Generally, the rotation is you can fit 3 Rats in between every spender to keep Rattle the Stars up, or you can fit 2 Starfalls in between every spender to keep Rattle the Stars up. You always want to be in Solar Eclipse, pressing Wrath and single target, and you want to be in Lunar Eclipse, pressing Starfall in AoE. So this next pull is actually extremely dangerous. It's right before the first boss. So the real things you have to look out for here are the textbooks cache monstrosities, which put someone to sleep for 7 seconds, and you definitely want to kick that because people don't like being asleep for 7 seconds. And the other thing happening in this pull is there's more spellbound scepters casting Mystic Blast, which does a ton of group damage and will probably wipe you if the kick gets missed. This group, we actually do a fairly good job of getting them all together and blasting AoE. We let one Mystic Blast go off, which hurts a bit, but on this key level it doesn't kill us. And then we just continue the pull and start kicking everything and take them down. So as I mentioned before, the really key part of Balanced Druid damage right now is Rattle the Stars uptime, and we actually have an additional tool to help us with Rattle the Stars uptime, which is our tier set. So our tier set right now gives us a free cast of one of our spenders, which counts towards Rattle the Stars, every time we enter an Eclipse or cast Celestial Alignment, and that just really helps us maintain the 2 stacks of the buff uptime all the time. You see a lot of the times I will multi-dot right before an Eclipse ends, I will cast a spender, and then I will re-enter into the Eclipse and get my free cast to keep Rattle the Stars uptime. So this first boss has a few mechanics. The primary things to watch out for are balls that spawn that you have to soak around the edge of the room. It's very similar to the second boss in Upper Karazhan if you played in Season 4. Just don't let the balls hit the boss. They give you a slight buff when you pick them up and deal some damage to you, so be careful. The other things this boss does is he puts a spread mechanic on some players that drops a pool underneath you, so you want to spread out and drop those pools far away and get out of them quickly so you don't die. And the final thing the boss does is when he reaches 100 energy, he has like a little AoE damage explosion, and he spawns some swirlies at your feet that have kind of a weird looking animation. It's not a traditional swirly, but they will kill you if you stand in them. Make sure you move out. So right here you can see the balls spawned around the edges of the room, and I'm just going to move to pick one up. It's very much a team effort. The tank can pick them up when they're fairly close to the boss. You just don't want to let any of them touch. Also, you can see the boss just targeted me with the spread mechanic, which drops a pool. I take a bunch of damage from it, but I live. As far as my single target rotation goes, it's very similar to the AoE rotation, where you just want to weave spenders in between Rattle the Stars, except instead of pressing Starfall on single target, you're pressing Star Surge. You can see right there the boss just did his big AoE explosion, and I'm running away from pools under my feet. This is what I was talking about when the boss hits 100 energy, and it's the last mechanic of the fight. Everything else just repeats over and over again. Soak the balls, drop the pools, run away from the dots under your feet. I'm going to speed up the rest of the fight just to save some time, but it is just more of the same. You soak the balls, you drop the pools, you watch the shit under your feet, and that's the entire fight. And here you can see me ignore the mechanic and just stand in a puddle underneath me and die. After the boss is finished, you turn around and go across the bridge. These pulls are very similar to the first two trash pulls of the dungeon. This one right here is just Mystic Blast is the only dangerous thing that you have to kick, and you just cleave them down. And the pull afterward is more of the Mana Devourer worm guys. So it's just they leap to someone and then cast a frontal that you want to dodge. I'm going to skip through this to save some time. This next pull is a really good example of how to do big mass AoE damage as Boomy. So you can see our tank is pulling all kinds of stuff, and I'm setting up all my multi-dots. Once they're all together, I'm going to press the Stunfire, get into my Eclipse, use my free Starfall from the tier set, pop CA, use my second free Starfall from the tier set, start dropping mushrooms and spamming Starfall as much as possible. I drop my Fury of Elune. I have tons of Astral Power coming in from the mushrooms and Fury of Elune, and I'm dealing a lot of damage. Unfortunately, I get a little bit carried away and forget about the frontal, which does kill me. Definitely something you need to watch out for in these pulls. After that pull is finished, you take this wind to go jump across to the next guy. This is just a big single target dude. He spawns tornadoes that stun you that you don't want to stand in, and additionally he makes melee run away, which is very annoying. It's just single target rotation, entering Solar Eclipse using Wrath, and maintaining Rattle the Stars using Star Surge as much as you can, and maintaining your dots. I'll let the clip of this guy play just so you can watch me fail at dodging tornadoes, as well as the actual single target rotation on the left side of the screen. And I wanted to talk about one other thing, which is a little bit nuanced with Balanced Druid AoE damage. So the mushrooms deal a lot of damage, and they actually deal nature damage. So there actually probably is cases where if you have enough mushroom charges, you want to enter Solar Eclipse in mass AoE to get the bonus mushroom damage out. I'm not exactly sure what the math is on the number of targets and the amount of charges you need in order to get value out of entering Solar Eclipse with mushrooms. And additionally, with Celestial Alignment box coming from Pulsar, it might not be entirely worth. But it's definitely something interesting that I wanted to think about and just mention in this video. So if any of you theory crafters out there figure out the exact times you want to enter Solar Eclipse just to get your mushrooms off, let me know in the comments. After this guy falls, you jump across to the second boss of the dungeon over on this wind. So this boss, there's actually some more trash before the boss, so birds fall from the sky. There's 3 waves of these birds. They get increasingly harder as it goes on, and so you just have to deal with the 3 waves. The big guys in these packs, there's actually none in this first pack, but when they spawn in the second and third pack, they cast a big gust of wind frontal that you don't want to get hit by. It does damage and knocks you back. Outside of that, they just beat on your tank. They don't have any real mechanics. So this boss actually has a very interesting mechanic. There's 2 goals in this guy, one red and one blue. To actually start the boss, you have to throw 3 of the balls into the red goal just by picking up the balls on the ground and using your extra action button. So during the boss fight, you can actually choose which goal to throw into. Currently on the beta, this is extremely bugged. So the red goal works as intended and stuns the boss and gives you a slight damage amp. The blue goal is completely bugged out. It's supposed to give you a large haste buff and spawn gusts of wind for 15 seconds, but at the moment it permanently spawns the gusts of wind and just makes the fight an absolute nightmare to deal with and doesn't give you a haste buff. So we opt to just not throw into the blue goal at all and just beat on the boss and dodge the red swirlies. Scoring into the goal stops the red swirlies from spawning during the boss fight, and ignoring the mechanic completely is a disadvantage when this goes live because presumably they'll fix the bug, and scoring in the goals will actually have positive benefit. But the other mechanic this boss has is called Deafening Screech. it does big AoE damage to your group, which your healer has to deal with, and in addition to that, actually kicks you, and it's not just a kick, so you won't get nature or arcane locked, will get completely silenced for 7 seconds, making it very frustrating. So you definitely want to watch out for when Deafening Screech is being cast, and make sure you're spending an instant cast there to avoid being kicked so you don't get silenced. So when we talk about optimizing balanced druid damage, we've already covered the importance of Rattle the Stars uptime, as well as how to use your tier set to keep Rattle the Stars uptime even more. One other piece of the puzzle, Star-Lord is actually a very high value talent that you're likely going to be taking in a lot of scenarios. The way Star-Lord works is it's a haste buff that does not refresh itself and builds up to 3 stacks. So in order to optimize your damage, you would actually want to pool Astral Power towards the end of your Star-Lord buff and spend 3 spenders very quickly to build Star-Lord up to full haste as fast as possible so that you have the full 15-second duration of maximum haste buff. This is something that I'm really not used to playing around Star-Lord yet myself. It's definitely an additional piece of the puzzle that you can focus on if you're bored and try and get really good at optimizing Balanced Druid, and I think it will be important once the expansion comes out and the optimal rotations are more understood. The rest of this boss is just dodging red swirlies and doing single target damage. I'm going to speed it up. Like I said before, normally you would be doing the goal mechanic, but because it's bugged on beta, we're just not doing it. So now we're heading back towards the start of the dungeon on what you actually could choose as the first boss of the dungeon, but we opted to do it third. You could actually choose to go over to the boss that we did first in this dungeon, or you could go to this guy directly by going up the staircase at the start and do him first. Generally, I think this is probably the hardest boss in the instance, so I think doing him first and ripping your key, if that's what you like to do, go for that, but we chose not to in this case. So these trash packs are actually very interesting. So the Hungry Lashers and their big daddies actually really don't do a lot of mechanics, they just spawn green swirlies, which you'll see later. The real danger in this area are the Dragonflies, which leap to enemies and enrage themselves to deal increased damage. It is soothable, but all 3 of them are casting it, and you can't AoE soothe. And man, do they rip. When they jump to people, especially if all 3 jump to one person, you might just get one shot, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So the way that we pull this place is we pull the first pack of Dragonflies by themselves. There's actually a second pack of Dragonflies, but they patrol around the back side of the room, and you can actually just not pull them. You can pull the boss away from that area and ignore them completely. So we do the first pack of Dragonflies by themselves, as you're watching here, and then afterwards we do a giant pull with all the rest of the trash in this area, because none of it does a lot. So this pull is a good example of what I was talking about, where there's a lot of mobs and multi-dotting would gain you value, but because there's 3 mobs here that have way more HP than all the small ones, I'm just going to multi-dot the big mobs and then just start pressing Starfall, because I know my teammates will cleave them down. So for actual dungeon speed, it's definitely worth more to just multi-dot the priority targets and Starfall as much as you can. You can see there's lots of green swirlies spawning because we pulled all 3 at once. You can't split these up and pull them individually, but as long as you can dodge the swirlies, they don't deal any group damage. It's just tank damage, and tanks are immortal right now in beta. But you can see I'm interrupting a lot of casts in order to dodge. So this boss is actually very interesting. It's a very ad-heavy fight, so he has 2 types of ads that he can spawn. He spawns these small ads and seeds, which spawn as swirlies underneath the group. So what you actually want to do is stack up as a group and spawn them all near each other to cleave them down. And when they spawn, it does a big amount of group damage, so dodge the swirlies and be prepared to take group damage when they spawn, and kill them as fast as you can. Just big AoE, Starfall grind. The other type of ad he spawns is actually a tree, which casts a healing spell, which you definitely want to kick. It'll just heal itself and make it harder to kill. And there's actually a ticking damage in this fight that constantly builds up, so every time you're in this fight, you're taking a debuff. And when you kill this tree ad that heals itself, it has a little green circle on the ground that's barely visible. You want to stand in the green circle because it clears your debuff. As the fight goes on, you take more and more of this debuff damage, and the only way to clear your stacks and reduce the damage is by killing the tree and standing in its green circle. I'll skip to a clip later on that illustrates this and show the boss. You can see right here our group is all stacked up, and there's swirly spawning underneath us that are spawning the ads, and we're all running in the same direction to keep them grouped up to let our melee cleave them down easier. As a balanced druid, we don't really care if they're super stacked because Starfall go burr. Because this is burst AoE, I just drop a single Sunfire and start mashing out Starfalls as fast as I can to try and get some damage in. So this big swirly you see here is what spawns the tree ad that casts Healing Touch on itself. This is an ad you definitely want to focus down and cleave alongside the boss. I generally dot it up and keep casting Starfall against the boss because it does good damage to both of them. Right here you can see as the tree dies, there's a green circle on the ground that you want to stand in order to clear your debuff on this fight. If you do not clear your debuff, you're just going to be taking extra damage. I did not get into this green circle because I didn't see it. It is hard to see, but it's definitely something you want to do. So right here you can see the green circles on the ground, and I actually stand in it to clear my debuff this time, doing the mechanic correctly. And this is the end of the fight. The boss is going to go down here. So after you finish the first 3 bosses, the thorns blocking the staircase here are available to go up. So you go up the staircase and pull the next packs. These next packs are fairly safe. They mostly just beat on your tank. There is one mechanic you need to watch out for called Disrupting Pulse. It is a non-kickable mechanic that does group-wide damage and kicks you, so you do not want to get locked. At the moment, it instantly recasts after getting stunned and interrupted. I believe this will probably change before it makes it to live because it's a little bit of an oppressive mechanic. But you really want to watch out for and make sure you're CCing Disruptive Pulse. This is a really great place to show off your Druid utility. You have 2 30-second AoE interrupts between Incapacitating Roar and Typhoon, both of which I'm running, and you can see we are really chain CCing Disruptive Pulse. So this next pack has the same mobs. There's a Whirlwind, which melee has to get out of, and more Disruptive Pulse spam. I actually really like the way our tank pulls this. It sets it up very easily so range can easily line of sight. You can line of sight Disruptive Pulse if you don't have any stops for it. That's the other way to deal with the mechanic. Like I said, I think it's very oppressive at the moment and is a highly likely candidate to be changed before this dungeon goes live. But just in case it does go live, know that you can line of sight Disruptive Pulse and use that to your advantage. After that pull, we're at 95%, which is the perfect count we want to do the final pack before the last boss. But this is Pat here, which we're waiting to, it goes around this whole circle, so you can just wait and walk past it without using any invisibility potions. And then we're going to pull that last pack in front of the doorway inside there in order to avoid pulling the Pat mid-pull. And we're going to cleave it down, and then we'll head to the last boss. This is another Disruptive Pulse pack. Just make sure you're CCing it as much as possible. We let a few go off, but no one dies. I'm going to take this downtime to describe the last boss. The last boss is all played around one central debuff. When you get 3 stacks of this debuff, you drop a pool at your feet, which shoots projectiles out in directions. So it's all about avoiding mechanics to not drop these pools, because they fill up the room rather quickly, and you want to dodge any projectiles that are being shot out by existing pools. This boss has a few primary attacks. It has a suck in and then get out, where you have to get out of the range. It has a targeted bomb, which deals damage to a player and applies a stack of the debuff. It has an AoE group damage, which applies a stack of the debuff to all players. And it has a frontal breath, which has very, very large range, and it's a very large cone, so you want to be close in melee range in order to dodge this breath. I'll show you all these mechanics and also how the pools drop and what they do. So on pull, the boss really isn't doing much. It's just biding its time before it starts spamming out mechanics. So here you can see the boss cast Energy Bomb. That is its target player spread mechanic, which gives them 1 stack of the debuff. And here the boss sucks us all in and has a big circle that we have to run out of. Again, standing in that circle will deal 1 billion damage and give us another stack of the debuff. And after it sucks in, it always follows with Astral Breath, which is the large frontal cone. I like to play in melee to avoid that easily, and it just rotates between those mechanics. Spread and apply a stack, and then it's going to suck us in again, and then it's going to do Astral Breath again. And that right there was the group-wide damage that applied 1 stack of the debuff, which you can see I now have on me. And yeah, it just rotates these mechanics back and forth. The real interesting part of this boss is once you start dropping pools, there's more projectiles to dodge, and it's very much a game of space management. So there you can see, despite my best efforts, Astral Breath still hits me, even though I was trying to dodge it. It is a very large cone. I think playing in melee is essential in this fight. It is very hard to dodge if you're not very close to the boss. After getting hit by the breath, I am primed at 2 stacks of the debuff, 1 from the unavoidable damage, 1 from the breath. So now the next time I get hit by any mechanic on this boss, I'm going to drop a pool. So that pool in the ground in melee is dropped by one of our friends in this group. So now that pool is going to shoot out projectiles. Getting hit by those projectiles deals damage to you, as well as gives you 1 more stack of the debuff. This can quickly spiral out of control, and you can fill the room up with pools and projectiles and just die. So what I'm going to do is actually make the strategic play of intentionally getting hit and dropping my stacks and creating a pool at the far edge of the room where it will not be a big danger to everybody else. But yeah, this boss is all about dodging mechanics and dropping pools in strategic locations. There's nothing really special going on outside of that, except the breath is very hard to dodge. Make sure you pay attention to that. And that's the end of the dungeon. Even with one wipe on one of the bosses in this dungeon, we still managed to time it on a 15. It should be fairly doable. I think Algeth'ar Academy is a very well-designed dungeon. The extra secondary stats at the start are a lot of fun. If you enjoy this kind of content, let me know. If I was trying to pack too much information with doing both the dungeon guide and the balanced druid stuff at the same time, let me know. I'm kind of thinking about maybe breaking these up in the future. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do. I just wanted to try it out and see how it went. But yeah, if you're interested in more balanced druid content or just more dungeon guides in general, I'll definitely be putting more of those out. Like and subscribe if you want to see those, and yeah, have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.